Two most important conversation techniques that you can teach ESL students. Part 2. I'm going to discuss the second most important conversation technique to teach ESL students. Combined with rejoinders, which I had explained in Part 1, this technique is almost guaranteed to engage students in animated and enjoyable conversations. This second technique involves maintaining and extending the conversation by asking about what their partners had said. It's called using follow-up questions. What is really exciting about this technique is that there is research that shows that people who ask questions, especially follow-up questions, are actually more likable. Briefly, here's what researchers did. They set up a speed dating event which involved 12 men and 12 women. Everyone started off talking to one person of the opposite sex for 5 minutes and then rotated to a new person. The researchers recorded the conversations. At the end of the event, they found that the people who asked the most follow-up questions received the most requests for dates after the event. If you'd like to read more about this and another study concerning follow-up questions and likability, I'll include a link below. In this video, I'll share with you a student-centered approach to teaching this technique to ESL students. This includes a brief teacher introduction to follow-up questions, followed by some exercises, including a pair activity in the form of Student A and Student B, similar to the one in Part 1 about rejoinders. I've included a link below where you can go to download the complete activity for free. Here is how I introduce this technique to students, combined with the first technique, rejoinders. I would show this dialogue, which is based on a true story. Kara starts and says, "I heard you had a problem with your cat, Charlie." And Mickey responds, "Yeah, he climbed high up in a tree and couldn't get down for 3 days." Kara responds with a rejoinder and says, "Really?" And then she asks a follow-up question. "What happened?" And Mickey says, "We called the tree trimmer, who climbed up, but just as he reached him, Charlie made a huge leap to another tree and climbed down." And Kara responds again with another rejoinder and says, "That's amazing." And then she asks a follow-up question. "How is Charlie now?" And Mickey answers, "He just climbed another tree. I'm not going to worry about him." You can see how Kara was able to maintain and extend the conversation with Mickey. And you can imagine that Mickey feels like Kara is interested in what he is saying. From this brief introduction, in which the teacher is the focus for only a minute or two, students understand the value and purpose of using follow-up questions. From this point on, the activity is all student-centered. Next, we want students to learn how they can use these in conversations, so we have them work with some dialogues. As I have explained in Part 1 about rejoinders, just giving the students some dialogues and asking them to read the dialogues with a partner is not effective. Students tend to do that mindlessly. So instead, we have them fill in blanks in a dialogue. This involves critical thinking skills. They first do this individually. So A starts and asks, "What time did you go to bed last night?" And B answers, "At midnight." You can see that A needs to have actually listened to and understood B in order to fill in the blanks of 3A. First, A responds with a rejoinder. Oh, really? Then A extends the conversation by saying, that's late, and asks a follow-up question. What were you doing until midnight? And the conversation continues. Next, to further help students prepare for the pairwork activity, we have them do exercise 2. Exercise 2 has these directions. Think of answers, rejoinders, and follow-up questions, and write them in the following blanks. Of course, they do this individually first. This exercise 2 serves 2 purposes. It helps students see that the follow-up questions are connected to the previous answer that the partner had given. And it serves as a model for how they will carry out the next activity. After almost everyone has finished filling in the blanks of the papers, they then read these in pairs for a couple minutes. This is a very non-threatening way to do this. By reading these in pairs, they don't have to worry about making mistakes and feeling embarrassed in front of the whole class. At the same time, they are learning how this technique works. Now, students are ready to apply the technique to real conversations. In exercise 3, pairs practice a conversational format similar to the example in exercise 2. Each student is given a paper for either student A or student B. This is what student A's paper looks like. Student B will have a different paper, and they cannot look at each other's. As you can see, this pairwork activity involves 3 steps going from control to more free form. Here is what A and B look like side by side. In step 1, the questions are supplied, and the partners answer the questions and respond to their partners with rejoinders and follow-up questions. Before putting them in pairs, I'd recommend that you choose a student A and student B to model number 1 to the whole class. For example, A reads 1. What country would you like to live in someday? Then B can answer, for example, I'd like to live in Norway. And A says a rejoinder, really? And asks a follow-up question, why Norway? And B says, I heard that Norway is one of the happiest countries in the world. Then A can say another rejoinder, that's interesting, and asks another follow-up question, why do you think they're so happy? And then the conversation continues. In step 2, students have the opportunity to ask customized questions about topics that are most relevant to them. But because coming up with good questions on one's own can be a challenge, in step 2, students write the questions with a partner. Often these are not topics that even their instructor would have thought of. For example, students once wrote this question about one of their classmates named Sammy. Did you know that Sammy moved out of his apartment? When students do step 3, they change to new partners and ask the questions that they had written in step 2. During step 3, it's very common for the voices in the room to become louder with enthusiasm and to hear a lot of laughing as they work with new partners talking about topics that are most personal to them. As I had mentioned in part 1 about rejoinders, when students are doing pair activities, some pairs will naturally finish sooner than others. Here is what you can do in these situations. You can give those early finishers 3 options, which I would write on the board. They can change papers. Student A becomes B, and B becomes A. And then they do the exercise again. I found this very often what students will do. It's a totally new exercise for them, actually, because they're hearing completely different questions. Even though they had read them, they're answering different ones. Then another option is, if they want, they could just talk about anything that they want in English. And some students like to do that. They have something that maybe they want to talk about what their plans are for the weekend. And then there are other ones who would just rather just sit quietly and just kind of wait for the others to finish. It's just kind of a nice time to just stop and maybe reflect on the activity that they just finished. These options have always been effective and have taken pressure off the teacher to stop the practice early. Actually, it's usually the most serious students who take the most time doing the exercises. So it's kind of a shame to make them stop early just because, a couple of other pairs had already finished the activity. Again, you can see this is all very student-centered. As I had discussed in part 1 about rejoinders, you, the teacher, remains on the sidelines and is ready in case anyone has a question. But you don't interfere. You don't interrupt them if they have a pronunciation mistake or a grammar mistake. Those are not the purpose of the activity. I'll include a video on my channel in which I explain an important task teachers can perform during pair work. After students have completed this activity, they will understand follow-up questions and rejoinders. These will serve as the basis for all future conversations. And they will see how likable their classmates who use these are. As I had mentioned, below is a link to the handout activity, which you can download for free. Also, for more discussions about teaching ESL, please visit my blog. It's called Common Sense ESL. I'm planning to continue to add more videos about teaching ESL to my channel, Student-Centered Teaching ESL by David Kehe, right here. Feel free to subscribe. See you next time.